All right, Hotep, how's everybody doing today? All right, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. Today is Wednesday, May 16th, 2018. Wednesday, May 16th, 2018, and we are live today. I want to deal with this topic again. I talked about this, I dealt with this topic before, but the broadcast didn't come out well. There was a lot of audio distortion. So I wanted to deal with this topic again. And this deals with the topic of slavery, the history of slavery being taught in our schools and being taught to our children. And this deals with the Koch brothers, Charles and David Koch, who are billionaires. They're worth, I think, about between 30 to 40 billion dollars each. They have Koch, they're owners of Koch Industries and other entities. And the Koch brothers have an institute called the Bill of Rights Institute, the Bill of Rights Institute. And what this institute is doing is it's teaching an alternative version of the history of slavery, the Civil War, and Jim Crow. Okay, and they're teaching this in schools across the country. And according to the Bill of Rights Institute, so far they have miseducated 5 million children, school children, and 50,000 teachers. Okay, so I first found out about this. I found out about this in March of 2018. And I found out about it on the Joe Madison show, the Black Eagle, Joe Madison, right? And I did some research on it, and I said, "Whoa!" I said, "This is really something very bad." But a lot of our people, a lot of our parents don't know that this exists. Okay. And also, I'm going to talk some about the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. You've seen me talk about it before. There have been a number of articles written about this study. And this study deals with how the history of slavery is oftentimes mistaught in our schools and is often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. Okay. And that was a study, Teaching Hard History, from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I actually printed up the study. I've been going through reading it. And it also gives tips and resources to teach the history of slavery correctly. So I printed it up. I downloaded it from the Southern Poverty Law Center's website, splcenter.org. Printed it up. Been going through reading it. It's very, very good. But one of the things they talk about here, which coincides with what the Koch brothers are doing, is how 8%, so they surveyed 1,000 high school seniors across the country, 1,000 high school seniors across the country, okay? And it deals with how only 8% of high school seniors, surveyed knew that it was the Civil War that was central to the reason, it was slavery that was central to the reason why the Civil War was fought. Okay. Only 8% knew this. Okay. 68% did not know that it took a constitutional amendment to formally free the enslaved Africans. Okay. Only 32% knew that it took a constitutional amendment, which was the 13th Amendment, ratified December 6, 1865, to free the slaves. It wasn't the Emancipation Proclamation. About 36% thought it was the Emancipation Proclamation. No, it wasn't. January 1st, 1863. Okay. So when you see how little high school seniors know about slavery, then you see what the Koch brothers are doing, right? This is dangerous. This has wide-ranging implications because these people who are being miseducated by the Koch Brothers Bill of Rights Institutes, they're going to be future police officers, they're going to be future lawmakers, they're going to be attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, judges, teachers, hiring managers for corporations, etc. Okay. And then when you try to get your issues addressed, because all this deals with public policy, slavery was public policy, all the negative side effects that we're dealing with in society largely come from the side effects of bad public policies. Okay. 246 years of slavery was law. Jim Crow was law, even though it was in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Constitution is law. Okay. Brown versus Board of Education's desegregation case, 1954. That's law. Civil Rights Act of 64. That's law. Voting Rights Act of 65. That's law. The gutting of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in 2013 by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's law. So all this deals with public policy. Okay, so we have to understand how this is all interconnected and interrelated. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. Okay, share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. All right. Okay, so let's deal with this article. So there's an article from rawstory.com, rawstory.com from March 12th, 2018, entitled, "This is what the Koch brothers want children to learn about slavery." This is what the Koch brothers want children to learn about slavery. So it's some things people need to know about the Koch brothers. Number one, most people did not find out about the Koch brothers until 2010 with the rise of the Tea Party. Okay, because the Koch brothers were heavily financing the Tea Party. Now they've been influencing elections long before that, but people just didn't know about them. And there's also a documentary you should check out. You could probably find it on YouTube. It's called Koch Brothers Exposed, K-O-C-H, Koch Brothers Exposed. And this gives a lot of background information on the Koch brothers, okay? All right, so in this article from rawstory.com, this is what the Koch brothers want children to learn about slavery. It says, given that the billionaire Charles Koch, given that the billionaire Charles Koch has poured millions of dollars into eliminating the minimum wage and paid sick leave for workers, and that in 2015 he had the gall to compare his ultra-conservative mission to the anti-slavery movement, he's probably the last person you would want educating young people about slavery. Okay. And when you study right to work laws, the Koch brothers are heavily financing these campaigns for right to work laws in states. And the last time I checked, there are about 27 states that have right to work laws. We have it here in Michigan. Koch brothers financed that. It was through their Americans for Progress nonprofit organization that they use to help finance this initiative. And what right to work laws does is it attacks unions, it weakens unions, it drives down wages across the board in states that have right to work laws. Okay. And it benefits corporations, it benefits people like the Koch brothers. It hurts a lot of the poor white Republicans who voted for Donald Trump and who keep voting for Republicans. Because the first thing that a lot of these Republican state legislatures do when they come into power is they pass right to work laws. This is what happened in Kentucky back in 2016. Kentucky in 2016, it was like the first time in a number of years they had a Republican dominated state legislature and Republican governor. And the first thing they did was pass right to work laws. And what this did was drastically hurt the unions and a lot of these poor whites who voted for them in the first place. I think that was Kentucky. Yeah, Kentucky. Okay, so the article goes on to say, yet the history teaching wing of the Koch brothers empire is seeking to promote an alternative narrative to slavery, the Civil War and Reconstruction. Okay, now we just heard Kanye West's alternative history of slavery. He's confused. He needs some mental help. We understand this, right? Totally confused about the history of slavery. Okay. And then you have the Koch brothers who actually have the finances and they are actually miseducating teachers and students. Now, the political goal of these materials is to ensure students see racism and slavery as flaws in an otherwise spotless U.S. record rather than actually seeing racism and slavery woven into the fabric of our country from its inception. So instead of understanding that the history of this country is rooted in racism and white supremacy and slavery, and that the riches of this country were created based upon slavery and the exploitation of at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And I would also add that this was actually the land of African people stolen from us, because we've been here at least 51,700 years. And if you read the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, if you read this book, you will already know this, okay? If you listen to the interviews I've done with Dr. David Imhotep, you'll already know this, all right? So instead of having that foundation for the history of this country, which is a factual foundation, what the Koch Brothers Bill of Rights Institute is promoting is that racism and slavery are flaws in an otherwise spotless U.S. record, which is a total absolute lie. And the history does not support that, okay? So the Bill of Rights Institute, or BRI, is the education arm of the network of front groups that the Koch brothers use to promote their far right ideology. Now, Maureen Costello, the education director from Teaching Tolerance, which is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Maureen Costello has pointed out the many factual inaccuracies in the quote unquote homework help video that the Bill of Rights Institute has recently promoted to teach students about slavery. She concludes that the history presented is superficial, drained of humanity, and neglects to reckon with the economic and social reality of what opponents call the slave power. Okay, she concludes that the history presented by the Koch Brothers Bill of Rights Institute by their homework help video is superficial, drained of humanity, and neglects to reckon with the economic and social reality of what opponents called the slave power. Now, a dive into their what they call documents of freedom readings reveals an even more disturbing agenda. The Bill of Rights, the BRI, Bill of Rights Institute, bills the documents of freedom as a quote modern take on the traditional textbook, a completely free digital course on history, government, and economics, authored by unnamed teachers, quote unquote teachers. It's essentially an online textbook that aims to promote a particular version of history, a particular version of government and economics that aligns with the interests of the Koch brothers. Now, keep in mind, this $1.4 trillion tax cut that horrifically passed the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and signed into law by Donald John Trump, who's not going to be president much longer. The Koch brothers were those who were helping finance this initiative to give this $1.4 trillion tax cut. 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%. You had about 8 billionaire Republican donor families, the Mercers, the Koch brothers, the Walmarts, things like this, who were behind that. Okay, then the Koch brothers gave 500 after the tax cut passed was signed into law. They gave $500,000 to Speaker of the House Representative Paul Ryan's re-election campaign. Okay, then he announced he's not running for re-election. They also spent, the Koch brothers also spent $40 million on a marketing campaign to convince Americans that the tax cut was benefiting the middle class, the little guy, and overwhelmingly it's not. a woman is life. Yeah, sure, you may get $40 to $80 more in your paycheck, your biweekly paycheck. But they don't talk about the fact that now the Republicans are saying, okay, now we have to gut the social safety net to pay for this $1.4 trillion tax cut. And it's added at least $1 trillion to the national debt. And it's going to be our children that are going to have to pay for this. These are things that the Koch brothers are involved in. Okay, so the main documents, the main documents of freedom reading on slavery, titled "Slavery and the Constitution," is essentially a defense of the founding fathers and the Constitution against some scholars who portray the founding fathers as racist. Let me repeat this: the main documents of freedom reading on slavery, titled "Slavery and the Constitution," is essentially a defense of the founding fathers and the Constitution against some scholars who portray the founding fathers as racist. Now, the reading cherry picks quotes from the founding fathers to argue that they believe slavery was morally wrong, although the authors write that most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and most of the signers of the U.S. Constitution owned slaves. They steer clear of the brutal reality of chattel slavery. Okay, so it's one thing to think that slavery was morally wrong. When we study George Washington, right? So George Washington, it becomes a slave owner when he's about 11 years old. He inherits his slaves, okay, from his father. Now, later in life, George Washington thought that slavery was morally wrong, right? But George Washington didn't do anything about it. I mean, keep in mind, in 1793, George Washington signs into law the fugitive slave law, okay? And he left in his will that his slaves be freed not when he dies, but when his wife Martha Washington dies. Because of the 318 slaves that he and Martha Washington collectively owned, when he died, only one was freed upon his death, and that was William Billy Lee. That was William Billy Lee. William Billy Lee is the slave you see in that famous painting of George Washington, and you see a man of African descent next to him with a turban on, and people think, oh, he's not a slave, he's a more. No, he was a slave. That's William Billy Lee. Okay, so he was George Washington's personal assistant. Went with them basically everywhere he went. Okay. Let me see if we can pull up this. I'm going to pull up a picture of him for you. Pull up a picture of him for you so people can understand this. Because I hear people saying, "Oh, well, he wore a turban, so he wasn't a slave." No, that's not true. No, that's not true. Okay. Let's see. We'll try to pull this up. There was an article from theroot.com. I'm not the biggest fan of theroot.com, but even the broken clock is right twice a day. They had some good articles. Okay. I'm trying to pull this up for you here. Pull up another article because they changed their platform. All right. We'll pull this up on Wikipedia. Actually, we're broadcasting on Crowdcast, so I can show this to you. Let's see if we can blow this up. All right. I want to show you this picture so you can see what we're talking about. This deals with history. Okay, this separates fact from fiction. Okay, here we go. All right, so you should be able to see this here. Okay. So a lot of people have seen this famous painting. So this is a painting of George Washington done by an artist named John Trumbull. Okay, John Trumbull is the same artist who did the painting that you see depicted on the back of the $2 bill, okay, that many people think is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776. That's not the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That's on the back of the back on the $2 bill. That's the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, June 28th, 1776, by a 5-man committee. That's what that depicts. Okay. John Trumbull did that painting. John Trumbull also did this painting as well. Okay. So you have people who say, oh, well, this guy, and he's on a horse next to George Washington. He's a man of African descent, African man. And they say, oh, well, this person is not a slave because he's wearing a turban. Oh, no, that's not true. That's William Billy Lee. Okay. William Billy Lee was George Washington's personal attendant. Okay. Went with him everywhere he went. And upon George Washington's death, William Billy Lee was the only slave that Washington freed. The others were freed when George Washington's wife, Martha Washington, was free. Okay, the slaves that he owned. Her slaves were redistributed based upon her surviving family members. Okay, all right. So just so we understand that. And there's an article from the root.com called we'll pull this up for you. George Washington, slave owner, and the people he owned. George Washington, slave owner, and the people he owned, by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. Okay, and I ain't the biggest fan of Gates. Gates does write some good articles though, because I read his articles. That's how I know. Okay. Yeah, George Washington's runaway slave Harry. That's the name of this article from the root.com. George Washington's runaway slave Harry. Okay, you should read that. Okay. I ain't the biggest fan of the Root, but they do have some good articles there. All right. Okay, let's continue. But I wanted to deal with that history because I hear people saying these things that are just not factually, historically accurate. And the evidence there is to prove that it's not historically, factually accurate. We just posted a link to this article here on the thread of the broadcast, okay? George Washington's runaway slave, Harry. Now, when your children have like current events, right, at their school, and they have to take in articles and things like this, have them take this article in, talk about this, okay? Because I remember when we had current events in world history class, and I didn't like world history. I didn't like history at all in school because they told it from a white perspective. Okay, believe it or not, I didn't like history when I was in high school. I didn't do well in history in high school. I didn't understand it because they taught it from a white perspective. But taking articles like this, taking articles that we share here on the African History Network, our Facebook fan page, have your children take some of these articles in for current events. All right. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's go back to this article here from dealing with the Koch brothers. Okay, so, and we'll come to some of your comments here in just a minute. All right, so the main documents of freedom reading on slavery titled Slavery and the Constitution is essentially a defense of the Founding Fathers and the Constitution against some scholars who portray the Founding Fathers as racist. The reading cherry picks quotes from the founders to argue that they believe slavery was morally wrong, although the authors write that most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution owned slaves, they steer clear of the brutal reality of chattel slavery. They paint, for instance, Thomas Jefferson as an anti-slavery crusader who, quote, attacked the slave trade in harsh language and, quote, included African Americans in the universal understanding of the promise of liberty and equality. Okay, but the Koch brothers curriculum fails to mention that Thomas Jefferson wrote that African people or Black people were, quote, inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind, end quote. Thomas Jefferson thought that African people were mentally inferior. Okay. He also felt that African people could not feel grief as well. Okay. If you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroot, she talks about this in there also. Okay. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroot. All right. This is one of the books I use in my online course that I teach called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? We'll post a link here on the thread of the broadcast for that. That class is all on demand. It's 14 hours, 7 sessions. We deal with thousands of years of history. We deal with the transatlantic slave trade also. Okay, we'll talk some about that later. But we posted a link here on the thread of the broadcast. Also, it's on the homepage of AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. All right. So the Koch Brothers curriculum fails to mention that Thomas Jefferson wrote that Black people were inferior to the whites in the endowments, both of body and mind. Thomas Jefferson kept nearly 200 people in bondage, and even in his death, emancipated only 5 enslaved Africans. He regularly sold human beings away from their families to raise money to buy wine, art, and luxuries that only wealthy planters could afford. Okay, he sold away enslaved Africans to finance his lifestyle, to create wealth for himself and his family. Now, nothing in the Bill of Rights Institute from the Koch brothers, nothing in the Bill of Rights Institute reading acknowledges any contradictions between the founding fathers' awareness of the immorality of slavery and the need for action. Okay? The contradiction between the awareness of the immorality of slavery and the need for action, and their actual actions defending and protecting slavery. So it's one thing to think that slavery is morally wrong. It's another thing to actively do something about it to abolish slavery and to free enslaved Africans. So furthermore, the reading from the Bill of Rights Institute, the reading justifies the so-called 3/5 compromise, okay, 3/5 compromise of 1787, whereby, according to the article, whereby an enslaved person was counted as 3/5 of a person, 3/5 of a person for the purpose of congressional representation, while arguing the founders had to make a prudential compromise with slavery because they sought to achieve their highest goal of a stronger union of Republican self-government. Since some slaveholding delegations threatened to walk out, quote, not only is this type of compromise immoral, but the problem with the logic is that the slaveholding delegations that threatened to walk out were themselves founders who played an important role in crafting the Constitution. Okay, now when they talk about the 3/5 compromise of 1787, there's a whole lot of confusion around this. This is Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. And the article here has it partly correct. So this article was written by the Zen Education Project, Z-I-N-N, Zen Education Project. They have it partly correct. See, a lot of people, and I hear a lot of African Americans say this. I hear them on radio shows. I was at the Charles H. Wright Museum, and this was a event for it was a commemoration of the assassination of Dr. King. And I even heard an attorney, an African American attorney, say that the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. That's just factually inaccurate. That's factually and historically inaccurate. That's not what it says. So people should go to loc.gov, Library of Congress's website, loc.gov, and read the U.S. Constitution. Okay, loc.gov's Library of Congress's website. Read the U.S. Constitution. You can also go to archives.gov as well, archives.gov. Okay, and read it there as well. And let me post this here. loc.gov, okay? Library of Congress's website. So you can realize these historical documents there, Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, things like this, Gettysburg Address, etc. All right? So Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 states that for the purpose of apportionment and taxation, that 3/5 of the population in bondage would be counted. Okay, it does not say we were 3/5 of a human being. And what this is dealing with is the debate that was taking place at the Philadelphia Convention in the spring of 1787, when the Constitution is being debated. And they're debating, how do you count the enslaved population? Because you have the northern states saying, well, if you count the full population of those enslaved, this will give the southern states total dominance of the House of Representatives. Because what determines how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives a particular state has is based upon population. Okay, the U.S. Senate is different. U.S. Senate, as stated in the U.S. Constitution, each state has 2 U.S. senators. It's not based upon population. The U.S. House of Representatives is based upon population. Okay, so the question is asked, how do you count the enslaved population? Northern states are saying, well, wait a second. Many northern states have more free people than enslaved people. But when you have southern states, many southern states had more total population than northern states when you count the enslaved Africans. They're going back and forth debating this. Some people say, let's count half of the enslaved population. Some people say, let's count 3/4 of the enslaved population. So finally, they decide to count 3/5 of the enslaved population. It does not state that they were 3/5 of a human being. They're counting 3/5 of the population enslaved for a particular state. So hypothetically, say the state of Georgia has 100,000 enslaved Africans. 60,000 are going to be counted for the population count to determine how many seats in the House of Representatives the state of Georgia will have. Okay, now at the same time, the population of free African Americans, their full population was counted for representation when it comes to determining how many seats in the House of Representatives a particular state will have. Number one. Number two, when the first census is taken in 1790, because the first Congress meets in 1790, they commission the first census to be taken, and also you have the first Naturalization Immigration Act, which passes in 1790 by the Congress as well, which puts a 0% quota on the number of African people immigrating to the U.S. or coming to the U.S. unless they are slaves, okay, unless they are enslaved Africans. So when the first census is taken, the full population of those enslaved is counted, 1790. Now, the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 is corrected by the 14th Amendment of 1868, which gave citizenship to African Americans and gave rights to them, okay, which are going to be which are not going to be enforced oftentimes because of Jim Crow laws, but we're dealing with the history here. So the 14th Amendment of 1868 corrects the 3/5 Compromise. So I love Malcolm. You see a picture of Malcolm behind me. Malcolm's one of my heroes. But 1963, when Malcolm was interviewed he was doing an interview at the University of California, Berkeley, and he said that the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. This is where a lot of people get this from. That's not true. It's just not. That's not true. Okay. For more information on this, check out this article from theroot.com, 3/5 clause, why its taint persists. 3/5 clause, why its taint persists, by Dr. Paul. He goes deep, deals with the history of it. I've done a presentation on it as well. So when you get our when you sign up for our online course, and it's all on demand, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It's a bundle pack. We have about 10 courses in that bundle. It's on sale right now, $60, regularly $130. I go in depth. I have a whole section where I deal with the 3/5 Compromise, as well as the Electoral College and the history of the Electoral College, which comes out of the U.S. Constitution. And the Electoral College and the 3/5 Compromise are going to give Southern states a huge advantage in the House of Representatives, and it gives them an incentive to maintain slavery. Okay, even though a lot of the northern states had abolished slavery, because of the Three-Fifths Compromise of 1787, because of the Electoral College, it's going to give southern states a incentive to maintain slavery, and it gives them political dominance as well. People have to understand this. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is what politics is, okay? And in most of the social ills and most of the problems that African Americans are dealing with largely come from the negative side effects of bad public policies. The negative side effects of bad public policies, okay? All right, how's everybody doing? Okay. So also, if you like this type of information, hey, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have video clips there. All my DVD lectures are there. You can order. We have bundle packs like the 8 DVD Black Panther bundle pack. You can read all the articles that I write. We have over 800 audio podcasts of my radio shows. It also connects you to our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, on YouTube as well. All right, let's go to some of your comments, and we're going to go back to this article here dealing with the Koch brothers teaching a alternative version of history and slavery, which is really, really dangerous. Okay, because a lot of people, what happens is they've already miseducated 5 million children across the country and 50,000 teachers. A lot of some of you watching this right now, some of your children have been fed this information and you may not even know it. Okay. Markel said this is documented in the archives. Actually, James Madison. Thomas Jefferson didn't do what, David? Stay woke. Markel said over 3/5 of our total vote is counted and taken into consideration by Electoral College, which keeps the popular vote from having the final say. Over 3/5, I'm not sure what you're talking about. More, over 3/5 of our total vote is counted and taken into consideration by the Electoral College. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Keep in mind, the Electoral College only comes into play when it comes to voting for president. It does not come into play for U.S. Senate, House of Representatives, governor, state legislature, county government, city government. Only for U.S. president. There's a whole history behind that, and I deal with that in the course. I deal with the history of the Three-Fifths Compromise and the history of the Electoral College. Okay. My mother's family were sharecroppers. Markel said. Rise Lynn said, wow. What about the actual government documents that prove we shipped Aboriginals from North America to Africa? We paid. What documents are you referring to? Now, I've already stated that African people were here in this land going back at least 51,700 years before Native Americans came into existence. What documents are you referring to? Now, if you want to talk about Moors being shipped here, the Spanish were doing that. When I interviewed two weekends ago, when I interviewed Dr. David Imhotep on my Sunday night show, the African History Network show, on 9:10 a.m., the Superstation WFDF here in Detroit, because I do radio here in Detroit. If you watch us on Sunday nights, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're broadcasting right here on Facebook, broadcasting from the radio studio. When the Moors lose control in Spain, especially, some are fleeing, and some are being enslaved, and they're taken into Spanish territory. Some are taken into Florida and South Carolina because that was Spanish territory. These Africans known as the Moors. Let's see here. Boss Carey's watching from Chicago. Louis, Lorinda, how y'all doing? Mara said, okay, I hear that. Yes, I know they are evil, but understanding the goal of the subtle manipulation. Tiffany said the Koch brothers are, she's referring to the Koch brothers are evil. The Koch brothers are doing a lot to hurt Americans in numerous ways. Okay. Eric Brown, how you doing? Tina said the law is dirty. Okay. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so all right, so not only is this type of compromise immoral, let me back up. Okay, so furthermore, the reading justifies the so-called three-fifths compromise of 1787, whereby an enslaved person was, according to them, counted as three-fifths of a person for the purpose of congressional representation. It was three-fifths of the population was counted. They weren't looked at as three-fifths of a human being. Three-fifths of their total population was counted per state. Not only is this type of compromise immoral, but the problem with this logic is that the slave-holding delegations that threatened to walk out were themselves founders or founding fathers who played an important role in the crafting the Constitution. In addition to this, to selectively quote the founding fathers, the authors use quotations from Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln to bolster their argument that the Constitution was an anti-slavery document. It was not. Number one, nowhere in the Constitution does it mention slavery. It talks about those in bondage, things like this. The word slave and slavery don't even appear in the U.S. Constitution. Okay, now it ignores that most politicians, including Abraham Lincoln, believed that the Constitution protected slavery where it existed. Okay, it ignores that politicians, including Abraham Lincoln, believed that the Constitution protected slavery where it existed. It also ignores the very large wing of the abolitionist movement, whose most prominent figure was William Lloyd Garrison. So William Lloyd Garrison, he was a white abolitionist. He had the Liberator abolitionist newspaper, okay? And William Lloyd Garrison viewed the Constitution as a quote-unquote devil's pact, quote-unquote devil's pact, one quote-unquote dripping with blood, okay? Now, Frederick Douglass himself was part of that wing of the movement, of the abolitionist movement, until he broke with William Lloyd Garrison in the 1850s, when he became convinced that framing the Constitution as an anti-slavery document could be a useful tool in the struggle to end slavery. Okay, framing the U.S. Constitution as an anti-slavery document could be useful, a useful tool in the struggle to end slavery. Now, the readings from the Bill of Rights Institute, which is from the Koch brothers, also ignores how central slavery was to the economic growth of the United States, with phrases like, quote, the number of slaves steadily grew through natural increase, end quote. Okay, what natural increase are they talking about? There was nothing natural about the expansion of slavery. Slavery expanded because it was profitable. The authors seek to divorce the expansion of slavery from the economic design of the capitalist cotton empire and from the horrific practice of breeding or slave breeding, which became a large source of revenue, especially for Virginia slaveholders. So Virginia was the largest state, basically around this time, in time of the Constitution. Virginia was the largest state. And Virginia also had the most electoral college votes as well. Okay. When they talk about slave breeding, so the business of slave breeding is going to explode basically in 1808 and on, because of the March 2nd, 1807, the U.S. Congress passes a law that outlaws the importation of African people as slaves. Okay, and this was because of a 20-year clause in the U.S. Constitution that allowed the importation of slaves to continue. So these slaveholders who were delegates who were signing and debating the Constitution. It allowed them time to continue to fatten up and enrich themselves. So March 2nd, 1807, U.S. Congress outlaws or abolishes the African slave trade, but slavery is still legal in this country. It's just illegal to bring Africans in as slaves. History.com has a good article about this. March 2nd, 1807, Congress abolishes the African slave trade. March 2nd, 1807, Congress abolishes the African slave trade. And History.com is the official website of the History Channel. So what's going to take place is they're still going to bring Africans in as slaves, okay? They're going to violate their own law. They're going to violate federal law. They're still going to do it. But the business of slave breeding is going to explode and become one of the top businesses in the country, all right? If you saw the interview I did with Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury, they talk about new evidence that shows about 3.5 to 4 million enslaved Africans were still brought into this country, violating the U.S. violating their own law. Okay, they wrote an article for Black Agenda Report called "Reparations is Dead." Let me see. Yeah, reparations is dead. Authors seek to spark public discussion of new legal strategy. Reparations is dead. Authors seek to spark public discussion of new legal strategy. This is from August 8th, 2017, Black Agenda Report.com. And it says that the authors elaborate on their contention that activists have bungled the legal battle for reparations. Activists have bungled the legal battle for reparations. They are willing to debate in Cobra, the December 12th movement, Dr. Ron Daniels, Assemblyman Charles Barron, Dr. Claude Anderson, who's one of my teachers, but I agree with what they're talking about. I did 2 interviews with them. Randall Robinson, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and others. Because a lot of the people engaged in the reparations fight really don't understand the history behind this and law. Okay, and this is what this article breaks down. All right, we'll post this article here on the thread of the broadcast also. You should read it. And then if you go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, on the home page, click on the link for listen to podcasts of our shows. You can go listen to the podcasts, the interviews that I did with them as well. Okay. So, and then the Louisiana Purchase of 1803 also is going to give the U.S. is going to double the territory of the U.S. at that time. It's going to give the U.S. more fertile land to plant crops and increase the need for enslaved Africans also. Now, the article goes on to say, what is most egregious is what the reading leaves out, the reading from the Bill of Rights Institute from the Koch brothers, what the reading leaves out. Even today's corporate textbooks will include a paragraph or two that attempt to provide the perspective of enslaved African people. However, this reading concludes by arguing there was a steady, quote unquote, rise of freedom after the Constitution because the new nation was mostly bent on expanding liberty and equality. The only way the Koch brothers Bill of Rights Institute can draw this conclusion is by completely ignoring the perspective of those whose land and labor were violently stolen by the wealthy U.S. elite. The only way the Koch brothers Bill of Rights Institute can draw this conclusion is by completely ignoring the perspective of those whose land and whose labor were violently stolen by the wealthy U.S. elite. As if that reading was not bad enough, The follow-up reading, titled Civil War and Reconstruction, is a long, boring account that almost exclusively focuses on the battles between radical Republicans in the US Congress, who the authors claim wanted to punish the South, and Presidents Lincoln and Johnson, who favored more quote unquote moderate Reconstruction plans. It might be the first reading I've ever looked at on Reconstruction that makes almost no mention of what African Americans were doing during the era, and barely discusses anything happening in the South. And the purpose of Reconstruction was to rebuild the South. The South was devastated by the Civil War. The purpose of Reconstruction was to rebuild the South. You bring the South back into the Union. Okay. You're going to have you have the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Abandoned Lands, and Refugees. U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, commonly known as the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay, and it's providing some type of aid for the formerly enslaved Africans. One of the things it did was one of the first things we wanted to do after slavery ended was legally get married. So one of the things that the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands did was help formerly enslaved Africans get married legally. Also, it helped us to find lost loved ones as well that had been sold off. We were trying to put the family back together as well. Now, only in a pro-KKK film like Birth of a Nation, which debuted February 8th, 1915. Okay, 1915 was an important year because one, this is the year Booker T. Washington dies in 1915. Two, this is the same year that the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History was co-founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who in 1926 creates Negro History Week, which in 1976 became Black History Month, which is now African American History Month. 1915 was the second year of World War I. 1915 is also basically looked at as the beginning largely of the Great Migration, which is usually looked at as 1915 and 1960. And you have between 5 million, some sources say 6 million, African Americans migrating from the South up north and out west. Okay, 1915 is also the 50th year anniversary of the ending of the Civil War, which ends officially basically June 2nd, 1865. And the 13th Amendment as well, which legally abolishes slavery. Okay, so 1915 is a very, very important year. Okay, so the movie The Birth of a Nation debuts February 8th, 1915. And in the film, the Ku Klux Klan are the heroes of the film. If you know anything about the film The Birth of a Nation, it takes place during slavery. It takes place in Piedmont, South Carolina. And it takes place during slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. And it shows black men trying to rape white women, rape white virgins. The film causes race riots in the streets. No, the film literally, when you research this film, the film literally calls race riots in the streets. So you also get this book here. I don't even think this is even in print anymore, but I have a lot of books that are not in print anymore. So even you get this at an African American bookstore, Amazon. This right here is by Donald Bogle. Now, Donald Bogle is known as the godfather of African American cinema and like the history of African American cinema. So this is called Blacks in American Films and Television, an illustrated encyclopedia by Donald Bogle. I don't even take this out the house anymore because it's out of print. I think it's still out of print. So this is an actual encyclopedia of African Americans in movies, television, everything. So basically, so this came out in, I think, 1988, 87. Okay. So for the most part, every movie, every television show with a basically a significant African American uh, character in it, they're in here, and it gives you background information on the movie, who starred in it, TV shows, things like this. All right, and they have a good write up in here on the birth of a nation also. Okay, for instance, they talk about the movie Cabin in the Sky with Lena Horne and Eddie Rochester Anderson and Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters was one of the three women who played Beulah on the TV show Beulah, right? Okay, so get this by Donald Bogle. Donald Bogle, that brother, brilliant. Okay, I got this book May 23rd, 1995. That's when I got this book. All right. That's a deep book. Blacks in American Films and Television by Donald Bogle. Okay, let's continue. It's the Koch brothers, Koch. The Koch brothers. Okay, we've got Vi in Detroit. TJ said you can Google Koch brothers. Yeah. Check out the documentary also, Koch brothers exposed. Koch brothers exposed. Watch that. I saw it on YouTube. Okay, Koch brothers exposed. Okay, so only in a pro KKK film like The Birth of a Nation and in the Koch brothers curriculum is Reconstruction reduced to a punishment for white Southerners. All right. Let's look at Reconstruction from the standpoint of those who were freed from more than 200 years of enslavement. It was 246 years, but who's counting? It was a time when the formerly enslaved became congressmen, when the African American majority South Carolina legislature taxed the rich to pay for public schools. Okay. When the African American majority South Carolina legislature taxed the rich to pay for schools, because you're going to have, so Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. He became president-elect November, I think it was November 6, 1860. And he was of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party was created in 1854. Yeah, November 6, 1860. Republican Party was created in 1854 by groups of abolitionists to be the counter to the Democratic Party. And it was created as a direct backlash to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 gave sovereignty to those who were going into the Western territories to occupy Western territories, and it left up to those inhabitants of the Western territories to determine whether or not they wanted to have slavery in these Western territories, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the U.S. government. Okay, so you're going to have the Republican Party that's going to be formed in 1854 by groups of abolitionists. This is how it started out. Now today, Republicans are doing everything they can to put African Americans back in slavery. Okay, yeah, I said it. Okay, so we have to understand this chronology of history. We have to understand this chronology of history. Okay. All right. So let's continue. So it was a time when the formerly enslaved became congressmen. Okay, we're going to have African Americans who become members of the U.S. House of Representatives. You're going to have a couple of U.S. senators. You have one African American governor as well. And when the majority Black South Carolina legislature taxed the rich to pay for public schools, when experiments in Black self-rule in the Georgia Sea Islands led to land reform, new schools, and a vital local governance. During Reconstruction, African Americans and poor whites organized union leagues. African Americans and poor whites organized union leagues and led strikes, boycotts, demonstrations, and educational campaigns. Because you had a lot of poor whites, they're just destitute. And the Freedmen Bureau also helped a lot of poor whites as well. Okay, because a lot of them were destitute after the Civil War. Now, during this period, other social movements, especially labor and feminist movements, were inspired by the actions of African Americans to secure and define their own freedom. As the late historian Lerone Bennett Jr. wrote, it had never, quote, it had never happened before, and it has never happened since in America. Okay. And here is probably his most famous work, Before the Mayflower. Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., A History of Black America. Excellent, excellent book. He just passed away a few months ago. Before the Mayflower. This is my old beat up copy. You need to get another copy of it. So beat up. Cover came off. All right. This is the 6th edition. Okay. I'm not sure if they have an updated edition from that, but get that book, Before the Mayflower. All right. So during Reconstruction, quote, the poor, the downtrodden, and the disinherited presented their bills at the bar of history. During Reconstruction, the poor, the downtrodden, and the disinherited presented their bills at the bar of history. Okay, this is what Lerone Bennett Jr. said. Of course, today's elites like the Koch brothers have no interest in students learning this radical history. In the Koch brothers' history, the only mention of African Americans' actions comes in one sentence at the end of the reading that papers over the massive accomplishments of the era. Quote, although African Americans soon made up the majority of voters in some southern states and even elected some Black representatives to Congress, the right to vote was curtailed by southern states through several legal devices, end quote. Now, tellingly, the Koch authors finish off this reading with a quote from James Madison about the quote unquote tyranny of majorities, The authors claim that Jim Crow was an example of when African Americans in the post-Civil War South discovered firsthand the dangers of majority tyranny in a republic. That's not true. That's the main lesson the Bill of Rights Institute wants students to draw from the Civil War and Reconstruction. You can't trust the masses, so leave politics to the elites like the Koch brothers. Of course, the inconvenient truth is that when one actually focuses on the South during Reconstruction, we see an era where poor whites and poor African Americans took political power away from the elites. It's this history that the Koch brothers don't want students to learn. When we actually look at Reconstruction, this was a period of time. Reconstruction is from 1865 to 1877. Okay, this is a period of time when poor whites and African Americans took political power away from the elites. It's this history that the Koch brothers don't want students to learn. All right. So check out this article from rawstory.com. This is what the Koch brothers want children to learn about slavery. Okay. And this deals with their Bill of Rights Institute. According to the information coming from their Bill of Rights Institute, they have educated 5 million children, school children, and 50,000 teachers, okay, with their Bill of Rights Institute. And this is devastating because they're teaching incorrect history dealing with slavery. The evidence proves this, but you have a lot of people who don't know this. You have some parents watching right now. Your children are getting this misinformation, and you don't even know where it's coming from. You just know it's coming from the teacher in the school. Okay. All right. Okay. So if we look at and let's go to some of your comments here quickly. Also, now if you like this type of information, you can register for the online courses that I teach. We have a bundle pack. They're all on demand. You can watch them at your own pace. Okay. And our most popular one is called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. All right. And this is it's a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I teach. And we deal with thousands of years of history. We deal with ancient African history. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. We deal with ancient Egypt, because you have to deal with these things chronologically as much as possible. You have to deal with this chronologically as much as possible. To understand the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. Okay, and usually this is left out. This is left out of the history. Okay, when you deal with the Moors. All right, I was a where is that book? I was a guest lecturer at Eastern Michigan University in their Department of Africology and African American Studies back in October 2017. Dr. Patrick Pia, who teaches an introduction class to the Department of Africology, asked me to be a guest lecturer. And so I asked him, okay, send me a copy of your textbook that you use. And I got it around here somewhere. The textbook that they use. I said, send me a copy. It's a pretty good textbook. Send me a copy of the textbook that you use. I said, I want to see, you know, what you all are covering, things like this, right? So somewhere around here. So the textbook was written by the department, the department head. And in the beginning, you know, they talk about Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, they talk about Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, Dr. John Henry Clark, things like this, which is really good. But I go and I look in the index. I go in the back and look in the index, and I look under M, and I look for more. They don't talk about the Moors. And to understand the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand the Moors. So this is a good book dealing with the history of the Moors, Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who also wrote They Came Before Columbus. Okay. I think this is out of print. I don't take this out the house, because I saw on Amazon somebody was selling it for $300. So try to get that from your local African American book dealer, or get that from Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's official website. Okay, because his widow, he's an ancestor now. His widow runs his website. Okay, I forgot the name of it. But so I said, okay, well, you know, when I spoke to the class and did my presentation, I dealt with some of the history of the Moors and the connection between ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, and the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, and these are some of the things we talk about in the class. All right. So the teaching hard history study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. This one right here. I downloaded and printed it up. I took it to a printer because this is 52 pages. I'm not printing this up on my printer. This deals with how the history of slavery is oftentimes mistaught in our schools. And, you know, the whole craziness with Kanye West, and his comments about slavery sounding like a choice. Him talking about the way, and I read his tweets. Go back and watch my videos dealing with it, because I went and broke that down. I also interviewed Professor Kaba Kamene, who is a trained historian, one of my teachers, dealing with this, right? That reflects a lot of the ignorance that a lot of our people have about the history of slavery. It causes many of us to have a hatred for our ancestors who endured that, because we think they were weak. They weren't weak. They were actually stronger than a lot of these Negroes running around here today. Tell you the truth, we want to be honest. Okay. And then it causes false divisions between continental Africans and African Americans, because we don't understand that history of what happened on the continent also. Okay. And we don't understand the fact that African people fought the transatlantic slave trade every step of the way. But not only that, they also fought against the Arab enslavement of African people that existed hundreds of years, going back to about 640 AD, going back to 7th century AD, because Arabs were enslaving Africans for hundreds of years before the transatlantic slave trade started, and it was Arabs who also worked with, oftentimes worked with Europeans in the transatlantic slave trade and helped to teach them the trade as well, quiet as it's kept. So when we look at this 52-page study called Teaching Hard History, there was the first article I saw about this was from the Atlantic.com. I'm going to pull this up here. I'll pull up this PowerPoint presentation. It's from the Atlantic.com, and it's called Teaching Hard. It's called What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery. What kids are really learning about slavery. Okay, and it exposes. And a lot of us knew this, but some of us that don't have children in school may not know it. It exposes how history of slavery is mistaught, and it talks about the wide-ranging negative impact this has as well. Okay, so let's try to pull this up here. A new report finds that the topic is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. Okay, so if you do any homeschooling, this study is good to look at because it gives you ideas how to teach slavery, gives you some resources also. All right. Now this statue right here, this is on the cover. This is on the front page of the article from the Atlantic.com. What kids are really learning about slavery. This is a statue of Abraham Lincoln and an enslaved African. Okay. And this is called the Lincoln Emancipation Statue. All right. And this statue was paid for by former enslaved Africans and erected in Washington, D.C. in 1876. Okay. This is towards the end of Reconstruction. And this statue has been criticized for representing the history of slavery from a paternalistic perspective. Okay. So let's continue. All right, so it talks about a new report released by the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance Project points to the widespread failure to accurately teach the hard and nuanced history of American slavery and enslaved people. Collectively, the report finds that slavery is mistaught, mischaracterized, sanitized, and sentimentalized, leaving students poorly educated and contemporary issues of race and racism misunderstood. So one of the important things that this study talks about is how you have to make the connection between the history of slavery and racism that exists today. There's a direct correlation. There's a direct line. There's a direct line to the debates over removing the Confederate monuments and not understanding the history of slavery. Because the Confederate monuments were largely erected to terrorize African Americans, to be symbols of terrorism for African Americans, and to try to keep us in our social place that the dominant white society wanted us in. They were not largely erected to honor the Confederate soldiers and things like this. No, the majority of them are erected from 1895 to 1915 and 1955 to 1970. So the Civil Rights Movement, basically 1955 to 1970, they were erected largely in opposition to the Civil Rights Movement, in opposition to African Americans making any gains and gaining all of our rights. And then 1895 to 1915. 1895 is the year before Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case, which legalizes separate but equal, which legalizes Jim Crow. And during this period of time, from 1895 to 1915, you're going to have an increase in the number of lynchings in this country, increase in the racial terror inflicted upon African Americans. 1915 is the second year, basically, of World War I, but also 1915 is the year the movie The Birth of a Nation came out also. And 1955 is a significant year because not only is it looked at as the beginning of the civil rights movement with the Montgomery bus boycott, which starts December 5th, 1955, right? Because of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the Cleveland Avenue bus December 1st, 1955. But 1955 is the year after Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case. So you're going to find that you have a lot of schools that are going to be renamed after Confederate soldiers and Confederate heroes and Confederate generals as a direct backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case. And you're going to have Confederate monuments erected to terrorize African Americans in opposition to civil rights. Okay. So we have to understand that these are all symbols. These are symbols that need to come down. Every Confederate monument needs to be taken down. They should be put in a museum where they belong. In place of that Confederate monument, there should be a historical marker placed, which talks about what was there, why it was taken down. Okay. And then the history taught in the schools has to be corrected. The history curriculum has to be corrected, okay, in the schools. All right, so and one of the things that the study talks about is how, let's see, in what it describes as the first analysis of its kind, the teaching tolerance, which is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, conducted online surveys of 1,000 American high school seniors and more than 1,700 social studies teachers across the country. The group also reviewed 10 commonly used U.S. history textbooks and examined 15 sets of state standards to assess what students know, what educators teach, what publishers include, and what standards require vis-a-vis slavery. Okay, and they found that among 12th graders surveyed, only 8% could identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Only 8% could identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Fewer than 1/3, or 32%, correctly named the 13th Amendment as the formal end of U.S. slavery. And 35% thought it was the Emancipation Proclamation that ended slavery. Only 46% knew that the Middle Passage was the transport of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the North America, that leg of the triangular trade going from Africa to the Americas, okay, or the so-called New World. That's the Middle Passage, all right? So check out this article, What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery, from theatlantic.com. What kids are really learning about slavery from theatlantic.com, okay? Now, and I encourage you to read the study also. They have a link to the study here in this article, because he gives some tips. One of the things they talk about is reading the slave narratives. Reading the slave narratives, okay, is a good way to get a firsthand account about slavery. And Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who's a nephew to Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who's one of my teachers, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries from Ohio State University. He is the chair of the advisory board, okay, that put together this study. And he said, slavery is hard history. Slavery is hard history. And he's an associate professor of history at the Ohio State University. He said, it's hard to comprehend the inhumanity that defined it. It's hard to discuss the violence that sustained it. It is hard to teach the ideology of white supremacy that justified it. And it is hard to learn about those who abided it, okay? So also check out this article here from NPR.org, Why Schools Fail to Teach Slavery's Hard History. Why Schools Fail to Teach Slavery's Hard History, okay? All right, now, how's everybody doing? So in the online course that I teach, which is all on demand, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And we'll post a link here on the thread of the broadcast. You can register for this. It's all on demand. As soon as you register, you can start watching it. Like about 10 courses in the bundle pack, including Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. There's a class I did dealing with the film Black Panther as well. There's a lot of stuff in here. Okay. So it's normally $130, but we have it discounted right now for limited time only. Okay, so some of the things I deal with in the online class. What was the transatlantic slave trade? What were some of the events that led up to the transatlantic slave trade starting? Because you have to deal with these things chronologically. What role did Christopher Columbus play in the transatlantic slave trade? When did Africans first come to the U.S. as enslaved Africans? Because, 2019, they're celebrating, there's going to be a commemoration of the, we're told that this is when the first enslaved Africans came to this land, okay? But the Spanish were taking Africans into the area we call South Carolina in the 1520s. That was Spanish territory, South Carolina. But that's not looked at. That's 100 years before 1619. So even as enslaved Africans, there were African people here before August 20th, 1619. Okay, and we know the Spanish are going to abolish slavery. We know that Florida, for instance, is going to be free territory. Okay, and up until 1821, when the U.S. Takes control of Florida. But you have a lot of the enslaved Africans in the areas surrounding Florida that will run away and go into Florida. This is one of the reasons why the U.S. wanted that territory. And this leads to the Seminole Wars as well. The Seminole Indians, this leads to the Seminole Wars. You read about John Horse and Osceola and Morning Dew, things like this during the Seminole Wars. Okay, we'll do it. What role did Christopher Columbus play? Because Columbus was essential and like really central to the spreading of the transatlantic slave trade with Columbus's 4 voyages, starting August 3rd, 1492, when he set sail on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And the new lands that Columbus is uncovering, Columbus helps to lay the foundation for slavery, racism, capitalism, and the exploitation of people. It's also important to understand that Columbus never came to this land we call the United States of America. So I show you where he goes in this. When I do my presentations, I show you where he goes on his 4 voyages. He never comes to the land we call the United States of America. He goes into Central America. He goes into the Caribbean. He goes into South America a little bit. The land that we call the United States of America, he never comes to this land. Closest he comes here is Cuba, which is 90 miles away. Did Africans sell themselves into slavery? So we deal with that complicated history because it's largely misunderstood. Were African people in America before the slave trade? Absolutely. This is our land taken away from us. African people were here. We were here going back at least 51,700 years ago. The Khoisan, who come from Southern Africa, have the oldest DNA on the planet. When you talk about Sarah Bartman or Sarah Bartman, who in 1810 was in London, and she was bought. She was Khoisan. She was called Hottentot Venus. She had large breasts, large buttocks. She was about 4'7". Okay, and she was displayed in freak shows. She was displayed like in circuses, freak shows, side shows. Okay, this is in London in the early 19th century. She was Khoisan. Okay, the Khoisan are the short-statured people, the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. We deal with shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything. So we deal with some of the archaeological discoveries that came out in 2017. Extremely important because these archaeological discoveries, and not just 2017, but also in the last few years, these archaeological discoveries are causing the archaeologists, the scientists, the paleontologists to have to rethink everything and keep pushing the dates back. Okay, so there was one in Morocco in June or July 2017. They found skeletons of Homo sapiens, modern man, that date back 300,000 to 350,000 years ago. 300,000 to 350,000 years ago. Well, this is totally groundbreaking, because this is 100,000. This is at least 100,000 years older than the oldest remains of Homo sapiens found in Ethiopia that date back 195,000 years ago. These in Morocco date back 300,000, 350,000 years ago. And when you read articles about this, the Discovery Channel, their website had articles about this, Washington Post, New York Times, NBC News, National Geographic, all the news outlets had articles about this discovery. They said that we're going to have to start looking for humans in places we didn't think to look before. And they're saying that maybe people migrated, maybe there were multiple migrations, and these migrations happened much earlier than we thought. Okay, but when you listen to a lot of the African-centered scholars like a Runoko Rashidi or Dr. David Imhotep or Dr. Charles Finch, they've been saying for years that Homo sapiens are 300,000 years old at least, and not 100,000 or 200,000 years old. And these archaeological discoveries are proving this. Okay, so the deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets. The more research they do, the older we get. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets. The more research they do, the older we get. So we deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And the Moors are descendants of the Garamantes. We know they go into 711 AD into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. They fight against the Vandals and the Visigoths. The Vandals and the Visigoths came down from the northwestern Europe, and they crushed the western portion of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, which cast Europe into what are known as the Dark Ages, or also called medieval, the medieval times, or medieval era. It's going to be the Moors, the teachings that the Moors are bringing from ancient Africa, especially ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. They're going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. And this is what Golden Age of the Moor talks about a lot. So we deal with shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything. We deal with the role insurance companies play in the transatlantic slave trade, because they took out insurance policies not just on slave ships. They took out insurance policies not just on slave ships, but also sometimes on enslaved Africans on the plantations. Because there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And we also did a lot of dangerous work. It wasn't just picking cotton. It wasn't just cooking the master's food and taking care of the master's children, things like that. No, we worked on steamships. We worked in sawmills. We worked in coal mines. Okay. We did a lot of dangerous work also. Okay. So you had over 40 insurance companies in this country that took out insurance policies on enslaved Africans on the plantations. Okay, so we deal with Freemasonry, America and the Founding Fathers, origins of the terms, America and Africa. There's a lot that we did. That's why it's 14 hours broken up into 7 sessions. There's a lot of bonus content also. Deal with the problem with slave movies and the proliferation of slave movies, and also a slave-themed TV show. Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and the origins of the Immaculate Conception, which goes back. Immaculate Conception story was told over and over again, adapted to various people's cultures. Now, some of this may be outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Doesn't mean it's not true, just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Links to ancient Kemet and early Christianity, because Professor James Small talks about, one of my teachers, he talks about how they took fragments from the periphery of African spiritual systems to form Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And you have the retelling of the Immaculate Conception, the virgin birth, the Annunciation, the Adoration. You have a retelling of that story in Christianity coming from ancient Kemet. That story goes back to Nubia, going back at least 3300 BC in ancient Nubia, or Ta-Nehisi, because Nubia is a Greek word. We also talk about the fake Willie Lynch letter 1712, because Willie Lynch never historically existed, which is why we need to throw that Willie Lynch letter in the garbage can. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Please stop talking about the Willie Lynch syndrome or Willie Lynch letter, Willie Lynch this, Willie Lynch that. Willie Lynch never historically existed. The letter's been proven to be a fraud. I have I think we include that in the course also. I did a whole presentation dealing with the Willie Lynch letter and breaking down why it's a fraud. There are words in the Willie Lynch letter that didn't even exist in the early 18th century, 1712, early 18th century, or if it did exist, the way that the terms were used, the way that the words were used in the early 18th century was totally different than the way we use them today. Okay, so we need to stop talking about Willie Lynch. This is something that I talked about if you watch my broadcast that I did dealing with Kanye West and his comments about slavery. I follow him on Twitter. I read his tweets also. A lot of those tweets have been deleted. But he talked about a Willie Lynch theory and all this stuff, right? Get out of here with that. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Okay, so let me see something here. So we, like I said, we deal with some of the archaeological studies. Of course, we talk about Dr. David Imhotep's book, First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. Page 14 of his book deals with an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years, discovered in Allendale County, South Carolina in 2004 by Dr. Albert Goodyear. And they found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. 13 different disciplines fairly documented an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. Then this is Dr. Albert Goodyear, who's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. Now, this is an article from ScienceDaily.com. This is a scientific website, ScienceDaily.com. They have a lot of scientific articles there. This article is from November 18th, 2004. Most people never heard of this type of information. The name of this article is New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. New evidence puts man in North America 50,000 years ago. And here's a summary of what the article says. Now, this is not my summary. This is what the summary from ScienceDaily.com. Radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments containing these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. Who were these people? These were African people. These were the Khoisan, okay? So these are some of the things we deal with. We talk about the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. We talk about what the Moors take into Europe, okay? So when you see the Washington Monument, right, that is an ancient African symbol called a tekken. A tekken. The Greeks call it an obelisk. And the teachings that the Moors take into Europe are going to form the foundation of Freemasonry, okay? We know the Knights Templar formed during the Second Crusade, 1118 AD. They're going to get these teachings from the Moors. They become very powerful. They're going to be disbanded around 1309, 1310. In France, they're going to be rounded up around 1307, 1308. On October 13th, or Friday the 13th, and around 1307, 1308. And this was said to be the day that the knowledge stopped. This is one of the reasons why people have a fear of Friday the 13th. The fear of Friday the 13th is called frigatriskaidekaphobia. Frigatriskaidekaphobia. Okay, that's the fear of Friday the 13th. So we deal with that here because we talk about the Druids and things like this, the Druids in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. And you see this term right here, right? We talk about the suppression of the knowledge and the fight against the Druids. This is where St. Patrick comes into play, right? Because we did, like I said, we deal with a chronology of history. And Patrick was not Irish, he was British. St. Patrick, he was not Irish, he was British. And he was a British slave. He was a British slave. But in 432 AD, Pope Celestine I sent Patrick into Ireland to he sent him into Ireland to convert the population to Christianity. Okay, he was British. he was enslaved by the Irish, though. Okay, this is what happens. He's captured. He's enslaved by the Irish. He returns to um, the British territory, because this is part of the Roman Empire at this time. So it's not the British. Is not the British as we understand it, coming from like Great Britain under control of the Anglo-Saxons. Okay, which is going to take place later. This is under control of the Romans. This was part of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is expanding. So Pope Celestine I in 432 AD sends Patrick into Ireland to convert the Irish. And he's fighting against the Druids, who are dealing with a watered down version of teachings and spiritual systems coming out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Okay, and this is where I talk about frigatriskaidekaphobia, which is the fear of Friday the 13th. Frigatriskaidekaphobia. Okay, there's a whole history behind the etymology of the word, and Freya, who was the wife of Odin, coming out of Scandinavian mythology. I don't have time getting into all that, but we'll deal with that in the class. Okay. So, and when you look at Freemasonry, right, because we talked about the Tekken, which is a symbol of resurrection coming from the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru, okay, and there are about 1,200 Tekkenu throughout ancient Kemet. Today, there are only about 12. But when we look at Freemasonry, the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge. The term child of light, or sons and daughters of light, was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of ancient Kemet. Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt. Egypt is an Arabic word of Greek derivation. Kemet means land of the blacks. You may also see the word Ta Mary, which means the beloved land. So many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. So the concept of going to college, getting your credentials in a series of degrees, this comes out of ancient Kemet. This comes out of the temples, comes out of the lodges. This is where this comes from. And the concept of liberal arts. Well, in these temples, they taught the 7 liberal arts, the logic and rhetoric and things like this, arithmetic. They teach the 7 liberal arts. This is what George G.M. James talks about in his book, Stolen Legacy. Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. He talks about the trivium and the quadrivium, the 3 and the 4. This deals with the 7 liberal arts. The concept of liberal arts colleges. This is where this comes from. Because see, when you study the history of the Moors, you're going to find that a lot of your oldest colleges, a lot of your early colleges in Europe, they were created to study the Moorish science text. They were created to study the teachings that the Moors take into Europe. So Cambridge, Oxford, University of Toledo, University of Bologna. We know University of Salamanca was the first University of Salamanca, built around 1285 AD. This was the first university in Europe. This was built by the African Moors and some Arabs, but the African Moors. So there's a whole history here going back to Europe and how these Africans brought Europe out of the Dark Ages. This is why I say I wish we had never taught them, because all that stuff we taught Europeans came back to kick us in the behind. Okay, so these are some of the things that we deal with in the online course. We have a bundle pack right now. You get 10 of them. Not going to be much longer like this. You get 10 of them on sale for $60, regularly $130, including this one here. These are some slides from the actual class that I teach. I do a PowerPoint presentation. You have video clips, things like this. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, this that course is a 14-hour, 7-session online course. There's a lot of bonus content also. Okay, but it's all on sale right now. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com is all on demand, so you don't have to worry about getting back home at a certain time to ready to log into the class, things like this. It's all on demand. As soon as you register, you can start watching. You can watch from around the world, smartphone, tablet, computer. Okay. And we just posted a link here again. We'll go to some of your comments here in just a second. So a lot of people don't know that 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. The layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles. Read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. This is one of the books we use in the course. You don't have to, so we use the books for reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along, but these are good books to have in your library. Read page 18 of Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. Also, 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons also. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Okay, let's go to some of your comments here. Eulalia said they were still putting black people that worked for them on insurance policies until late 1960s. Black people didn't know why the white man paid for their family member's funeral. They thought that was something special when the white folks would come to their family member's funeral. That's how they stayed so rich on our family members. Okay. Now, where was this taking place? Mm-hmm. Now, corporations do this. It's called key person or key personnel insurance, something like that. I think it comes from slavery. Okay, because in the documentary from Michael Moore, he had a documentary, Sicko. I think it's in that one, Sicko. In one of his documentaries, he talks about this, how people working for corporations, the corporation would take out an insurance policy on them. They die. The corporation cashes in on insurance policy. They don't know, and their family doesn't know anything about it. Now, I've heard corporations would do this like on key people in their in their company, like CEOs and COOs, things like this also. Okay, now TJ said, "I love getting this history. I love getting this real history, not his story." Otabinga, a pygmy that had lived in the Bronx Zoo. The white man said they would bring his family to the U.S. Yeah, Otabinga ended up committing suicide. He was about 25, 26 years old. He shot himself in the chest, if I remember correctly. Otabinga committed suicide. They had him on display in the zoo, and they marketed him as like the monkey boy or something like this, right? Just totally dehumanizing, totally dehumanizing. TJ says still part of her anatomy in jars. That was Sarah Bartman, Sartojay. Okay, we posted an article yesterday showing a comparison between Sarah Bartman and Nicki Minaj from blackden.com. And a surgeon removed her genitalia after she died. Surgeon removed her genitalia. I'm signing up soon. Okay, Mars, I'm signing up soon as it's over. Yeah. How you all like this type of information? Those watching, how you all like this type of information? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. Be sure to register for this online course as a bundle pack, okay? And so that also helps support the African History Network, helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting on Sunday nights, keep doing what we do. Then also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, you can do that as well. PayPal.me/the AHN show. PayPal.me/the AHN show. You can donate to the African History Network as well at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And then you can click on that link, the PayPal.me/the AHN show. donate through PayPal, but you also at our website, click on the yellow PayPal button at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com as well. Also, okay. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter as well. Okay. Let me look at some more of your comments. We send out the email newsletter 3 or 4 times a week. Okay. Try to get some more of your comments in here. Linda said, as an educator, 30 years, I always taught African-American history as I was taught in Africology in college. Now, when you study Africology in college, Linda, did they deal with the history of the Moors? I don't mean like one page in the book. I mean, did they deal with the history of the Moors, especially 711 AD to 1492? See, to understand the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand Christopher Columbus. That's why I deal with things chronologically in the course. You got to understand Christopher Columbus, his 4 voyages. You have to understand the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors was set up Columbus to be able to sail. Okay, Columbus is using nautical instruments that are based upon Moorish technology that the Moors introduced into Europe. He has Moors navigating his ships like Pedro Alonso Nino. So we have to understand this chronology, and the Portuguese are the ones who were first involved in the transatlantic slave trade right about 1440. And Spain and Portugal are right next to each other, and the Spanish are going to quickly follow. Okay, Willie said, your honesty is most refreshing. Michael Imhotep. Okay. All right, thanks, Willie. Patricia said about the Jefferson Davis Highway that goes through most of Virginia into DC. I feel uncomfortable every time I'm on it. Totally understand that. There's an article from history.com people should check out, because I talk a lot about the Confederate monuments, things like this. I actually have a presentation dealing with the history of the Confederate monuments as well. So we have bundle packs at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have an 8 DVD bundle pack. One of them that has that presentation in there dealing with the history of Confederate monuments and the history of the Confederate battle flag as well, or the history of Confederate flags and the Confederate battle flag. This one right here is our latest bundle pack. I'm gonna come to the Confederate monuments just a second. I have it right up here. The 8 DVD Black Panther bundle pack includes 2 of my presentations dealing with the film Black Panther, 3 documentaries, and 3 other presentations. But there's an article from history.com that talks about, that deals with the Confederate monuments, okay? And people should read this. It's called How the U.S. Got So Many Confederate Monuments. How the U.S. Got So Many Confederate Monuments, okay? And it talks about how these commemorations tell a national story, while every statue in every town has a different origin. Taken together, the roughly 700 Confederate monuments in the United States tell a national story. Many of these commemorations of those on the losing side of the Civil War are a lot newer than one might think. Okay, I think it's more than 700. I saw one estimate of about 1,500 or so. Some have been taken down. But here's the thing: you only had 11 states in the Confederacy. The Confederate States of America exists from 1861 to 1865. You only had 11 states in the Confederacy. Why do you have Confederate monuments in 31 states out of 50 states in the U.S.? The Confederate monuments honored traitors to the Union who succeeded from the Union, starting with South the 20th, 1860, 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect, because South Carolina thought that Abraham Lincoln was going to free the slaves. And these other Confederate states that joined the Confederacy, these other southern states that joined the Confederacy, think that Lincoln's going to free the slaves. They separate, set up their own government, elect Jefferson Davis to be president of the Confederate States of America, create their own flag, all this stuff. And they take up arms against the Union. So why do you have 31 states that honor traitors to the Union? These monuments were largely erected to terrorize African Americans. They were symbols of terror, and they still are. Okay. Then also, a lot of people don't know, you have about 100. You have what is it? Oh, you have over 129,000 children who attend schools that honor Confederate leaders. Over 129,000 kids attend schools that honor Confederate leaders. 191 schools around the country are named for leaders who fought to uphold slavery. Okay, half of the students are students of color that go to these schools. Read this. Huffington Post Black Voices had a big article about this. August 17th, 2017. Over 129,000 kids attend schools that honor Confederate leaders. Over 129,000 kids attend schools that honor Confederate leaders. These are people who took up arms to keep their ancestors enslaved. Okay, I'm gonna try to pull up this article here and put it on the thread of the broadcast. Okay, this is from Huffington Post Black Voices. So all this, see, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past and the present and the future. So all these things that we think about in the past, they are relevant right here today, and they deal with and influence why things are the way they are today. So you have to understand a chronology of history and how a sequence of historical events lead to a larger event taking place. There's a domino effect. Okay, so to understand why things are the way they are today, we have to understand the history behind it. Okay. All right, we'll post this article here from Huffington Post Black Voices. Have your kids take an article like this in for current events. Over 129,000 kids attend schools that honor Confederate leaders. Imagine that. Do any of your children attend a school named after a Confederate leader? Okay, Daryl said the Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first black president. Really? I mean, I read the pamphlet from J.A. Rogers. Right? These people ain't consider themselves black. I mean, he may have had an African ancestor. Okay, these are not people who consider themselves black though African American. It's not somebody I would claim. Abraham Lincoln has some African ancestry. Abraham Lincoln was his grandmother or great grandmother was Melungeon, and these were people of color. He has some type of African ancestry, but okay. So with Dwight D. Eisenhower, because J. Rogers has the pamphlet Five Negro Presidents, right? So the question I would ask is, what good did it do us? Daryl said, I meant the Twa people of Africa. Yeah, they come from Southern Africa, the Twa. So the Twa are derisively called pygmies by European anthropologists and archaeologists, things like this. Angela said, even in a previous technology and society class, they made no mention of African influence. Beverly said, who was the first black president? You want to talk about the first black president that considered themselves black? That would be Barack Obama. It wasn't John Hanson. There were two John Hansons. They have a whole presentation done with that. There were two John Hansons. The white John Hanson was a senator to Maryland, and he was president of the Continental Congress from 1781 to 1782, and he dies in 1783. The black John Hanson was a senator to Liberia. Liberia wasn't founded until 1821 by the American Colonization Society, which was founded in 1817. The famous photograph that you see of the Black John Hanson, that's circa 1852, 1856. It's on the Library of Congress's website. That is taken with a camera called a daguerreotype. The daguerreotype was the first photographic camera. The daguerreotype camera was named after John daguerreotype, who invented it. The daguerreotype camera was not invented to about 1826, mid 1820s, wasn't available for commercial usage to the 1830s. Okay, so the question you should ask yourself is, how do you have a picture of a man taken with a camera that was invented about 40 years after he died? Because when you research John Hanson, who was president of the Continental Congress during the American Revolutionary War, was 1775, 1783. He was president 1781 and 1782. He died in 1783. So how do you have a picture of a man who's supposed to be president, and the camera that took the picture was invented at least 40 years after he died? There were two John Hansons. Okay, so we need to take that John Hanson, Black John Hanson was president, throw that in the garbage can, along with the Willie Lynch letter. Because none of that stuff is true. All right. Okay. All right, so look, we got to get out of here. Should register for our online course. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, 22828. Sign up for our email newsletter. If you like this type of information, be sure to support the African History Network. We definitely need your support. This helps us stay on the air, pay the bills, keep doing the research. This is a lot of work here also. If you want to donate, you can donate paypal.me/the AHN show. Also, buy our DVDs, especially my lectures, to help support us also. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay? And if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, be sure to email me at info@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Info@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization as well, we'll set that up. I'll be in Atlanta weekend of June 15th through the 17th for the Juneteenth celebration. I'll be speaking there as well. Look out for that. And also, I'll be in San Diego for Return of the Gods coming up, August 10th through the 12th. Return of the Gods. Professor Kaba Kamene will be there with me as well. We have that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, we'll post a link here. There's a special promotion going on right now. There's an African History Network weekend discount. We'll post that link here. It's also at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay? All right, got to get out of here. Remember, right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.